All right. This group is Justice for Felons in the Criminal Justice System. We are Elizabeth, Miranda, Rudy, and Rayanne, and Melanie. And I'm going to go straight into our introduction. So the criminal justice system is disproportionately against Black or brown men in the United States. It's troubling that African Americans and Latinos represent an estimated 60% of all state and federal prisoners in the United States when they only represent 27% of the US population. Physical and sexual assault are part of the prison experience. Roughly 21% of male inmates are physically assaulted, and between 2 to 5% are sexual assault. Disenfranchisement equals voter suppression. Felony disenfranchisement policies across the nation prevent an estimated 6.1 million Americans from casting their vote, in some cases permanently. The liberal goal is to work towards reinstating voting rights to every felon who has paid their debt to society. Resilient strategies for felon society reentry is necessary and effective to reduce recidivism. Some of these strategies include building a supportive community, building relationships with mentors who can help the felon with goal planning for success. Addressing stigmatization, felons continue to be criminals in the eyes of society, robbing them from the dignity every human being deserves. Even when they are doing everything right in the eyes of the law, felons are frowned upon and continuously shamed. That's just wrong. Building bridges, ex-offenders need ladders towards upward mobility. As social workers and advocates, we can help. There are many benefits to building the bridges that will train and educate felons to believe in themselves and in the opportunities that are possible if they gain employment skills. Employers receive grants and tax breaks for hiring and training ex-offenders and felons. The stigma must end. I have found that ex-offenders makes the best workers because they appreciate what others take for granted. So here are some felon population demographics. About 2.9% of US residents are currently on probation or parole as of 2015. Men make up about 90% of those convicted of felonies. About 70% are high school dropouts. About 1 in 15 US working adults are ex-felons. Over 50% were under the influence when they were offending. There are also a lot of disparities in race. For the felon population, African Americans are incarcerated at 5 times the rate of whites. More than 60% of incarcerated people are people of color, at only 13% of the overall US population. A criminal record reduces the likelihood of a callback or job offer by 50%, a rate that is 2 times that for African Americans. 15% of jail inmates and 22% of prisoners experience infectious diseases compared to 5% of the general population, which speaks to the poor prison conditions that continue to exist in the US. And that's from Shriver 2020.
Physical and sexual assault in the prison system. Physical and sexual assault are part of the prison experience. Approximately 21% of male inmates are physically assaulted during a 6-month period. Sexual assault is estimated at between 2 to 5%. Physical injury occurs in 40% of physical assaults and 70% of sexual assaults between inmates, and in 50% of the assault perpetuated by staff. Staff on inmate physical victimization were found more Blacks, 25.5%, and Hispanics, 29.5% of the inmates, compared to non-Hispanic white, which are 19.4% of the inmate population. Oppression and discrimination against felons. Felon disenfranchisement in the United States is the suspension of voter rights of everyone due to a felony conviction. Due to a felony conviction is oppressed by disenfranchisement, which equals voter suppression. According to Kelly 2020, across the country, states impose varying felony disenfranchisement policies, preventing an estimated 6.1 million Americans from casting ballots. It is common practice in many states to make felons ineligible to vote, in some cases permanently. Over the last few decades, the general trend has been towards reinstating their voter rights at some point, although it is a state-by-state policy choice. Ex-felons are people who work, pay taxes, attend schools, and have a family to raise. Meanwhile, their voices have been silenced, and they do not get to say in who they represent, who represents them in a legislative policy that affects them.
And so this is actually a map of felony disenfranchisement by state. I thought it would be good to add this in here just because it lets us see how many states have so many restrictions against people voting. Like us in New Mexico, we don't let inmates, parolees, or probationers vote, but in comparison, somewhere like Maine has no restrictions. So I just thought this was interesting for us to see, so we can see really the impact that disenfranchisement has. And so when we continue talking about oppression and discrimination, it's important to look at employment and wages. A criminal record often means that a person may be homeless or live in poverty because of discrimination when it comes to hiring is estimated at 11% less than their counterparts. So they make 11% less than their counterparts without a criminal record for doing the same job, and they work 12% fewer hours per week. It is also estimated that the discrimination against formerly incarcerated people results in earning losses from 10 to 40%. It's important to note that this also disproportionately affects people of color, and it is a determining factor in recidivism. So 33% committing another crime, 33% are estimated to commit another crime if they're unable to find employment in 8 months, according to Lorenz. Discrimination also happens when applying to college and trade schools, because they have been known to discriminate against ex-felons when they apply for admission. Institutions may ask about their criminal history in the admissions process and reject those with the record. Although a recent interview of the available research finds that there's no evidence that screening applicants for prior convictions improves safety on campuses and in general, nor is there evidence that screening deters crime, as stated by Scott Clayton in 2017. So I think this is important because it makes us see that really it's not necessary to ask people about their criminal records. Really, it's an invasion of privacy, and it's used as a way to discriminate against them. This makes it difficult to pursue higher education, which leads to lower wages as well. So there's also discrimination when it comes to housing. Federal law bars housing discrimination against people with criminal records. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development has put landlords and other housing providers on notice that a policy of denying housing to anyone with a prior arrest or any kind of criminal conviction will violate the Fair Housing Act. Housing discrimination against felons when they apply for housing opportunities or even a rental is common. Many housing projects and private landlords may have policies against renting to individuals with a criminal history, especially against people of color. And I also added that this is parallel to the systemic disparities in our criminal justice system, which just means that this more often happens to people of color. And it is important to note that people with criminal records aren't always protected under the Fair Housing Act. So other forms of oppression appear in the difficult process for some people to get loans or adopt children. I did add that adoption does depend on the crime, time since you were convicted, and what the investigation reveals about you and your family. So I think that gives hope to some ex-felons that they will be able to adopt one day. One of the other major forms of oppression is a stigma that is attached to having a felony conviction. It is very damaging and often does not allow individuals to progress because it has implications for access to resources and opportunities. And the stigma is often lifelong. So when dealing with oppression and discrimination, these are some resiliency strategies that can also be used as reentry strategies when we're trying to reintegrate an offender into society. Some of those are having a mentors and a strong support system. More importantly, mentors that are trying to help you on a better path. having obligations to and relationships with family that keep you tied to your community. Also having communities for support, especially faith communities, that's been known to help a lot of people. Planning and having goals for the future, having a goal for when you go out into society again, or just to keep you on the right track. Available resources from the government, from NGOs and from churches, having professional help for mental health, substance use, and medical conditions, especially when you consider all the physical and sexual assault that happens in the prisons, and just the experiences that people go through in there that probably makes you realize how much help they really need, and volunteering to help others, to help build skills and to contribute to society so that you feel that you're also giving back.
So a lot of the research I did reflects what Elizabeth found. So Zhang, Roberts, and Callahan did a study in 2006 about this Preventing Parolee Crime program instituted in California. It was a statewide integrated program of a bunch of different service networks. And these networks addressed housing, employment, substance abuse, and education. They provided long-term housing for parolees and then helped them find permanent housing afterward. They provided employment opportunities and connections so they could find employment without facing as much discrimination. They provided substance abuse help in the form of support groups and residential treatment facilities. And they also provided them with educational opportunity in the form of tech centers in the parole offices where they could do online classes that would advance them up to 2 grade levels. So they found that the overall recidivism reduction rate was 8%, but the more immersed in the program that the parolees were, the more reduction they found. So the implications for this are that we should expand community-based correctional services and encourage parolees to stay in the program. The authors recommend doing this with incentives, but also sanctions, which are like punishments against them if they do not participate, and even coerced treatment, which is a bit controversial, but that is what they recommend. To address prison conditions, I looked at an article by Dye in 2010 that looked at factors that increase suicide risk, which often reflect the conditions in prisons, which they deemed deprivation conditions. So some of these conditions they found were higher security and single cell prisons accounted for 60% of all suicides. Less outside contact also increased the risk, which less family visits, less work release programs, less weekend furloughs increased their risk. Having more empty time increased their risk. So less rehabilitation programs, educational and vocational. Overcrowding in prisons increased their risk. And that even tended to erase the other positive factors and was also often happened in tandem with the lack of programming. And finally, violence increased their risk. Bullying, physical violence, and prison rape stressors dramatically increased people's risk for suicide. And so they found that increased deprivation factors and prevalence of prisoners with suicide risk factors increased the amount of suicides in prisons, obviously. So some of their recommendations were to change how prisoners do time to reduce suicide, violence, and aggression. So they recommend that we relax high security prisons, we eliminate, if possible, or reduce single cell prisons. We need to increase outside contact and connection to the community, institute more rehabilitation services, decrease overcrowding, and protect against violence. To address the stigmatization that, that felons often face after they leave prison, I looked at an article that looked at some of the advice of rehabilitation staff and the employers that hire prisoners or hire ex-prisoners when they are released. So ex-offenders, especially ex-drug offenders, face labeling, shaming, and other forms of stigma upon reentry to society, which lead to an immobility in their life and often lead them to reoffend. So this study was a qualitative study, and they used interviews. They interviewed the residential treatment facility team, and they found 5 themes. So this team found that instituting self-acceptance and resilience and promoting those in prisoners or in ex-offenders really helped them to better re-enter society. And they did that with a lot of peer support, increasing their opportunities, employment, housing, consistency in their life, being able to go to a 9-to-5 job, having a stable living situation that contributed to reentry into society. And then also the moral belief in a second chance was very important. And then developing employment skills and strategies. As for the employers who hire ex-offenders, 4 themes emerged from them. These employers had a desire to help others and give back to the community, and they had a belief in forgiveness and second chances. They also saw hiring the clients of the RTF team as a business asset because these prisoners were, or these ex-offenders were able to work strange hours, and they were very grateful for their employment opportunity. And the employers were also willing to aid in reintegration and reverse social stigmas. So the implications for this study is that we need to provide residential treatment facilities whose mission statement reflects the 5 themes found here, and seek out employers who hold these beliefs about helping ex-offenders, and educate those who do not, especially about how good of employees ex-offenders make.
So the history of incarceration of people of color, it began with slavery, and then once slavery was put to an end, then in 1877, they had the Jim Crow law, or which they termed the Black Law. And it was termed the Black Law because with that, they were still very oppressed, and they were, if they did anything wrong to a white person, a Caucasian person, or sat in the wrong place, or really did anything that a Caucasian didn't want them to do, then they could be arrested or have actions taken against them. And then there was the Civil Rights Act in 1875. In 1883, the Civil Rights Act was ruled unconstitutional, and it was declared, or what they said was separate but equal concept. And so failure to enforce this and following law, it resulted also in fines and imprisonment as well. And then in 1948, during World War II, the Civil Rights Act, after that, it was abolished, and the Jim Crow law. In World War II, there were a lot of African Americans that went to war and helped fight for our country, but again, they were still oppressed. They weren't treated the same as Caucasians. And so they felt like after the war that they needed to be treated better because of what they did, and they were seeing them more as people equal. And next slide. And so after going on with the history, there was a mass incarceration. Drugs, crime, and with that, the incarceration population grew. In 1980, when the Reagan administration, during that time, at the beginning of the Reagan administration, the prison population was at 329,000. After his 8-year term, the population grew to 627,000, almost double. And a lot of the people who were incarcerated could have had rehabilitation or lesser punishment for their crime, but rather than that, they were thrown in jail. And African Americans are known to have less opportunities for employment. They're exposed to drugs more, and they're more likely to be stopped and arrested by police. So another thing, when I was looking up information, another piece of information with incarceration that interested me was that with African Americans being exposed to drugs, It is known that if a Caucasian person purchases or uses cocaine, they use a powder form, whereas African Americans will possess and use a crack form of cocaine. So they're both having cocaine in their possession or using it, but the crack cocaine comes with a stricter sentence or more of a sentence than the powder form. And so again, there's more disparities between the two races, and they have a stiffer punishment. And next slide. And so contributing factors to Hispanic and Latino incarceration. And here's some statistics to begin with, is 88% of Hispanic Latino population earn a GED or diploma, whereas in the Caucasian and African American, it's 95% for Caucasian and 93% for African American, which leads to being able, it's a little bit more difficult to get a job. Poverty rates are at 23.5% for Hispanic Latino. They struggle in school due to language barriers and understanding the material. And this all leads to being difficult to find employment, and then they turn to other options because of lack of employment, which leads them into drugs. And so working with incarcerated population as a social worker, some of our responsibilities would be to do assessments for mental health, also to assess for potential substance abuse, to counsel both on an individual level as well as a group level, to set them up with rehabilitation services. It also said to help the family as a whole when they do get out of prison, and just to get them into the right place to continue with their rehab once they're out. And thank you.
The book that we chose was The Animal Factory by Edward Bunker. Prison hardens any person, even a white, nonviolent marijuana dealer like 21-year-old Ron Decker, a newbie in the prison system. The Animal Factory dives deep into the brotherhood behind the San Quentin prison gate and the dichotomy within the races for commodities, territories, and dominance. In other words, status. Rape and violence produce paranoia and unrest for many new inmates who are forced to fight back or risk being easy targets. Justice for inmates behind the gate is non-existing. It is all men for himself. It is usually the inmate versus the officer, and the officer will win 90% of the time. The other 10% are well connected with the inside, usually with the person in charge. The other main character is Earl Copen, who is an old timer in San Quentin. Ron lucks out because Earl takes him under his wing and provides advice and protection. This is usually an arrangement paid with sexual favors and companionship. When an inmate sexually assaults Ron Decker, he said, "I feel I have to watch my pecker and my butthole." And this is true. Good-looking newbies are never safe. The title of The Animal Factory is appropriate and on point for many reasons. The prison system first breaks down a man by humiliating them and treating them like animals. Then they expect acquiescence, obedience from them. When fights, gang fights, and riots take place, there is a court system within prison walls that will condemn the inmates every single time. Solitary confinement, isolation cells, and the hold are synonyms for dark and clammy lockdown cells within the prison system to further punish men who break prison community rules. The convict could stay in confinement for a week or for a lifetime, depending upon his color and the attitude and the offense, I might add. It is in the whole that men are made and broken at the same time. Earl has seen it all, but everybody needs friends, everybody needs friendships, and forming alliances in the prison system is common. There is strength and safety in numbers. The bond that Earl and Ron forged shocked them both. It's a felon's real education. And one of the things that I really liked about this book is that it puts in perspective the life of the inmate. And you really have to connect with people that have the same mentality as you, that are within your race. And the race war behind the gate is very real. And so this is, I really recommend this book. Next we have our references, which are the next 3 slides. We want to thank everybody for listening to our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.